The morning light filtered through the kitchen window in soft golden streams, catching dust particles that danced lazily in the air. Sarah stood at the counter, her fingers wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. The ceramic felt smooth against her palms, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the envelope lying on the kitchen table, its edges crisp and white against the worn oak surface. The return address belonged to Henderson & Associates, the law firm that had handled her mother's estate. 3 months had passed since the funeral. 3 months since she'd stood in the rain watching the casket lower into the ground. 3 months since she felt the weight of her brother Michael's arm around her shoulders as they both wept. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, almost oppressive. Sarah could hear the old refrigerator humming its familiar tune, the sound she'd grown up with, the sound that meant home. Outside, a cardinal call from the maple tree in the front yard, the same tree where her father had hung a tire swing 30 years ago. She remembered the rough texture of the rope against her small hands, the way her stomach would flip when Michael pushed her high enough to see over the fence into the neighbor's yard. Sarah set down the mug and walked to the table. Her bare feet made soft padding sounds on the linoleum floor, another sound from childhood. How many times had she run across this floor, chasing Michael or being chased, their mother calling after them to slow down, to be careful, to stop making so much noise. The memory brought a faint smile to her lips, but it faded quickly as she picked up the envelope. The paper felt expensive, heavier than regular mail. She slid her finger under the flap, feeling the slight resistance before it gave way with a whisper of tearing paper. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in precise thirds. Sarah unfolded it slowly, her heart beginning to beat faster, though she didn't know why. The letter was typed in formal legal language, the kind that always made her feel slightly anxious, as if she needed a translator to understand her own life. But as her eyes scanned the lines, certain phrases jumped out at her with startling clarity. Property deed, original documentation, discrepancy in ownership records, request for meeting, and then at the bottom, a sentence that made her read it 3 times to be sure she understood. Recent discovery of documentation suggests the property at 1523 Maple Street may have been acquired through means that require legal clarification and potential restitution. Sarah's hands began to tremble. The paper shook slightly, making the words blur and refocus. She pulled out one of the kitchen chairs, the legs scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made her wince. Sitting down felt necessary, as if her legs might not hold her much longer. The chair was the same one she'd sat in as a child, doing homework while her mother cooked dinner, the smells of garlic and onions and tomato sauce filling the air. Now the kitchen smelled only of old coffee and the faint mustiness that had crept into the house since her mother's death. She read the letter again, more slowly this time, trying to extract meaning from the careful legal phrasing. 1523 Maple Street. This house, the house where she'd taken her first steps, where she'd lost her first tooth, where she cried over her first heartbreak, the house where her father had died of a heart attack in the upstairs bedroom 12 years ago, where her mother had lived alone afterward, refusing to move despite Sarah and Michael's gentle suggestions that maybe a smaller place would be easier to manage. The words acquired through means that require legal clarification felt ominous, like a storm cloud gathering on a clear day. What did that mean? Her parents had bought this house in 1978, the year before Sarah was born. She knew the story by heart. Her mother had been 6 months pregnant, her father working double shifts at the factory to save for a down payment. They'd found this house, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a front porch and a backyard big enough for children to play in. It had been their dream, their achievement, proof that hard work and sacrifice paid off. Sarah's phone sat on the table next to the letter. She stared at it, knowing she needed to call Michael, knowing this wasn't something she could process alone. But her hand hesitated over the screen. Michael lived 40 minutes away now, in a newer development where all the houses looked vaguely similar, with their vinyl siding and 2-car garages. He'd moved there 5 years ago with his wife Jennifer and their 2 kids. Sarah had visited once, walking through rooms that smelled of fresh paint and new carpet, feeling oddly displaced, as if her brother had become a stranger who lived in a magazine photograph. Their relationship had been strained lately, though neither of them acknowledged it directly. It had started after their father's death, small disagreements that grew into larger silences. Michael thought Sarah was too sentimental, too attached to the past. Sarah thought Michael was too eager to move forward, to forget where they came from, at their mother's funeral. They'd barely spoken beyond the necessary arrangements. Who would contact the caterer? Who would write the obituary? Who would sort through her belongings? The belongings. Sarah looked around the kitchen, seeing it with new eyes. The ceramic rooster on the windowsill that her mother had bought at a yard sale. The calendar on the wall, still turned to March, the month her mother died. The collection of coffee mugs hanging from hooks under the cabinet. Each one a souvenir from some small trip or gift from a friend. These objects had seemed permanent. Fixed points in a stable universe. Now they felt precarious, as if the ground beneath them might shift at any moment. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Michael's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. It was 9:30 on a Saturday morning. He'd be awake, probably having breakfast with his family. She could picture the scene. Jennifer making pancakes. The kids arguing over who got the last of the syrup. Michael reading something on his tablet, half listening to the domestic chaos around him. The image made her feel lonely, though she couldn't quite say why. The phone rang 4 times before Michael answered. His voice sounded distracted, slightly annoyed. "Sarah? What's up?" In the background, she could hear his daughter Emma whining about something, and Jennifer's patient voice trying to negotiate. The sounds of family life, warm and messy and real. Sarah felt a pang of something she didn't want to examine too closely. "I got a letter," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "From the lawyers. Henderson and Associates." There was a pause. She heard Michael moving, probably walking to another room for privacy. A door closed, muffling the background noise. "Okay," he said. His tone had shifted, becoming more focused. "What kind of letter?" Sarah looked down at the paper in her hand. The words seemed to swim before her eyes. "It's about the house. They're saying there's some kind of problem with how Mom and Dad acquired it. They want us to come in for a meeting." Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could almost hear Michael thinking, processing, organizing the information into neat categories the way he always did. He was an accountant, trained to find order in chaos, to make numbers tell coherent stories. "What kind of problem?" he asked finally. "I don't know exactly. The letter is all legal language. But Michael, it sounds serious. It says something about restitution." "Restitution?" His voice sharpened. "Let me come over. I need to see this letter myself." "When?" "Now. I'll leave in 10 minutes. The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She set the phone down and looked around the kitchen again. The morning light had shifted, no longer golden but harsh and white, exposing every crack in the plaster, every stain on the linoleum. The house suddenly felt different, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sarah stood and walked to the sink, turning on the faucet. The pipes groaned and shuddered before water gushed out, another familiar sound. She rinsed her cold coffee down the drain and watched it swirl away. Then she filled a glass with water and drank it slowly, feeling the coolness slide down her throat. Her hands had stopped trembling, but her heart still beat too fast, a fluttering sensation in her chest that made her feel slightly dizzy. She walked through the house, moving from room to room, as if seeing it for the first time. The living room with its worn couch and the coffee table her father had built in his workshop. The dining room they only used for holidays. The table covered with a lace cloth her grandmother had made. The stairs with a third step that creaked, the one they learned to skip when sneaking in past curfew as teenagers. Her old bedroom, still decorated with posters from bands she'd loved in high school, the bed covered with a quilt her mother had sewn. Everything felt both familiar and strange, like a word you say over and over until it loses meaning. This was her home, the place that had shaped her, that held every memory of her childhood. But what if it wasn't really theirs? What if the foundation everything was built on turned out to be false? Sarah heard a car pull into the driveway. She looked out the window and saw Michael's silver sedan, practical and clean, so different from their father's old pickup truck that had sat in the same spot for decades, leaking oil and refusing to start on cold mornings. Michael got out, closing the door with a solid thunk. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt, his weekend uniform. His hair was starting to thin on top, she noticed, and he'd gained weight around his middle. When had her little brother started looking middle-aged. She met him at the front door. He didn't smile or offer a greeting, just held out his hand for the letter. Sarah gave it to him and watched his face as he read. His expression didn't change much, but she saw his jaw tighten, a muscle jumping near his ear. He'd always done that when he was stressed, even as a kid. "This is insane," he said finally, looking up at her. His eyes were the same blue as their father's, a detail that always startled her. "There has to be some mistake." "That's what I thought," Sarah said. "But why would they send this if there wasn't something to it?" Michael walked past her into the house, still holding the letter. He went straight to the kitchen and sat down at the table, reading the letter again. Sarah followed, leaning against the counter. The refrigerator hummed. The cardinal called again from outside. Everything normal, everything the same, except nothing was the same at all. "We need to find the deed," Michael said, "and any other paperwork Mom and Dad had about buying this place. There has to be documentation that proves they bought it legitimately." "Where would that be?" "Probably in Dad's office. That's where he kept all the important papers." Their father's office was a small room off the living room, barely bigger than a closet. He'd use it for paying bills and doing taxes, sitting at an old metal desk with a gooseneck lamp that cast harsh shadows. After he died, their mother left it mostly untouched, as if he might come back and need his space. Sarah hadn't been in there since the funeral, hadn't been able to face the emptiness of it. They walked to the office together. Michael opened the door, and they both stood in the doorway for a moment, breathing in the stale air. The room smelled of old paper and dust and faintly of their father's cologne, though that was probably just memory playing tricks. The desk was covered with neat stacks of papers, their mother's doing. She tried to organize things after he died, tried to make sense of decades of accumulated documents. Michael sat down in the desk chair, which squeaked under his weight. He started opening drawers, pulling out folders and flipping through them. Sarah watched from the doorway, feeling useless. She'd never been good with paperwork, with the practical details of life. That had always been Michael's strength and their father's before him. She was the dreamer, the one who wrote poetry in high school and majored in English literature, much to her father's bewilderment. "Here," Michael said, pulling out a thick folder. "Property documents." He spread papers across the desk, and Sarah moved closer to look. There were tax records, insurance policies, inspection reports. Michael's finger traced down a document, his lips moving slightly as he read. Then he stopped, his finger frozen on a line of text. "What?" Sarah asked. "What is it?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He picked up the paper and held it closer to his face, as if proximity might change what it said. Then he set it down carefully and looked up at Sarah. His face had gone pale, and she felt her stomach drop. "The deed," he said slowly. "It's dated June 15th, 1978. But according to this, the previous owner was a woman named Dorothy Chun. And there's a note here, handwritten in the margin. It says estate sale contested." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "What does that mean, contested?" "It means someone disputed the sale. Someone claimed it shouldn't have happened." Michael shuffled through more papers, his movements becoming more frantic. "There has to be more information here. There has to be an explanation." They spent the next hour going through every paper in the office, pulling out drawers completely, checking behind file folders for anything that might have been missed. The room grew warm with their body heat and the effort of searching. Sarah's back began to ache from bending over the desk. Dust coated her fingers, making them feel gritty and dry. Finally, at the bottom of the last drawer, tucked behind a folder of old utility bills, Michael found a manila envelope. It was sealed, the glue yellowed with age. On the front, in their father's handwriting, were 2 words, Dorothy Chun. Michael and Sarah looked at each other. Neither of them moved to open it. The envelope sat on the desk between them like something dangerous, something that might explode if handled wrong. The cardinal outside had stopped singing. The house was completely silent except for their breathing and the eternal hum of the refrigerator in the next room. "We have to open it," Sarah said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. Michael picked up the envelope. His hands were steadier than Sarah's had been with the lawyer's letter, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself rigid. He slid his finger under the flap and tore it open. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet room. Inside were several documents and a letter, the paper thin and fragile with age. Michael unfolded the letter carefully and began to read aloud, his voice flat and emotionless, as if that might make the words less real. "To whom it may concern. My name is Dorothy Chun, and I am writing this in the hope that someday someone will understand what happened and perhaps make it right. This house at 1523 Maple Street was my home for 32 years. My husband and I bought it when we were newlyweds in 1946. We raised our daughter here. My husband died here in 1972. I planned to die here, too, to spend my final years in a place that held all my memories." Michael paused, swallowing hard. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes, though she didn't fully understand why yet. He continued reading. "In 1977, I was diagnosed with dementia. My daughter Linda tried to care for me, but I became difficult, confused. I didn't always recognize her. I would wander the neighborhood at night, forgetting where I was. It was hard for everyone. Linda made the decision to move me to a care facility. I don't blame her for that. I know it was the right choice, even though it broke both our hearts." Sarah wiped at her eyes. Michael's voice had started to shake slightly, but he kept reading. "What I do blame her for, what I will never forgive, is what she did with my house. She told me she was going to rent it out, to use the income to help pay for my care. I signed papers, though I barely understood what I was signing. My mind was already slipping away. But Linda didn't rent the house. She sold it. She sold my home, the place where I'd lived my entire adult life, without my true consent. By the time I understood what had happened, it was too late. The sale was complete. A young couple had moved in, expecting their first child. They had no idea the house had been sold against my wishes." Michael stopped reading. He set the letter down on the desk and put his head in his hands. Sarah could see his shoulders shaking. She wanted to comfort him, to put her hand on his back the way she had when they were children, and he'd fallen off his bike or lost a baseball game. But she couldn't move. She felt frozen, trapped in this moment of terrible understanding. "Keep reading," she whispered. "We need to know everything." Michael picked up the letter again, his hands trembling now. "I tried to fight it. I hired a lawyer with what little money I had left, but the law was not on my side. I had signed the papers. Even if I didn't understand them, my daughter had power of attorney. The sale was legal, technically. The young couple who bought the house, they were innocent. They had paid fair market value. They had done nothing wrong. But neither had I, and yet I lost everything." The letter continued for another page, describing Dorothy Chen's attempt to reclaim her home, her growing confusion as the dementia worsened, her eventual acceptance that the house was gone forever. She died in 1983, 5 years after the sale, in the care facility she'd never wanted to live in. The letter ended with a plea. "I write this not for revenge, but for truth. That house was stolen from me. Legally, perhaps, but stolen nonetheless. If there is any justice in this world, someday my story will be known, and perhaps my daughter Linda will face what she has done." Michael set down the letter. The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating. Sarah felt as if she couldn't breathe, as if the air had become too thick to pull into her lungs. All those years, all those memories, all those moments of happiness and safety and belonging, and underneath it all was this: theft, betrayal, an old woman's heartbreak. "Mom and Dad," Sarah said finally, "they didn't know. They couldn't have known. Didn't they?" Michael's voice was harsh, angry. This letter was in Dad's desk. He kept it. He knew. Maybe he found it later. Maybe he didn't know when they bought the house. Does it matter? Michael stood up abruptly, the chair scraping back. The fact is, this house was sold under false pretenses. That woman, Dorothy Chun, she was robbed. And we've been living here, benefiting from that robbery our entire lives. Sarah felt defensive anger rising in her chest. We were children. We didn't do anything wrong. But we benefited from it. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every summer day playing in that backyard, all of it was built on someone else's suffering. That's not fair. Mom and Dad worked hard for this house. They sacrificed. They bought stolen property. Sarah, whether they knew it or not, that's what they did. The words hung between them, ugly and undeniable. Sarah wanted to argue, to find some way to make this not true, but she couldn't. The evidence was right there on the desk, in their father's handwriting, in Dorothy Chen's desperate words. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. Michael gathered up the papers, shoving them back into the envelope with rough movements. "We go to that meeting with the lawyers. We find out what they know, what they want, and then we figure out how to fix this." "Fix it how?" "The house is ours now. Mom left it to us. We can't just give it back. Dorothy Chen is dead. Her daughter is probably dead, too, by now. I don't know, Sarah. I don't have all the answers." Michael's voice cracked. "I just know that everything I thought I knew about our family, about our parents, it's all different now. They lied to us. Or at least they kept the truth from us. Maybe they were trying to protect us." "From what?" "From knowing that our childhood home was bought with someone else's pain." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Great protection." Michael walked out of the office, still holding the envelope. Sarah heard him go to the kitchen, heard the sound of water running. She stayed in the office, looking at the empty desk, the open drawers, the scattered papers. The room felt different now, contaminated somehow. She wondered if the whole house would feel that way from now on, if she'd ever be able to walk through these rooms without thinking of Dorothy Chun, without imagining an old woman with dementia signing papers she didn't understand, losing everything she'd built over a lifetime. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from her friend Rachel. "Still on for lunch today?" She'd completely forgotten. They'd made plans earlier in the week to try a new restaurant downtown. The text felt like it was from another world, a simpler world where the biggest concern was whether to order the salmon or the chicken. She typed back. Something came up. "Can we reschedule?" Then she put the phone away and went to find Michael. He was standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the window at the backyard. The grass needed mowing. Sarah noticed their mother had always kept it neat, hiring a neighborhood kid to cut it every week. Since her death, things had gotten a bit wild. Dandelions dotted the lawn like yellow stars. The flower beds were overgrown with weeds. "I keep thinking about that tire swing," Michael said without turning around. "Remember how Dad spent a whole Saturday getting it just right? He must have adjusted the height 10 times, making sure it was perfect for us." "I remember," Sarah said softly. Was he thinking about Dorothy Chin that day? Was he feeling guilty, wondering if we deserved to be happy in a house that had caused someone so much pain? I don't think Dad was like that. He didn't dwell on things he couldn't change. Maybe that was a problem. Michael finally turned to face her. His eyes were red, and she realized he'd been crying. Maybe he should have dwelled on it. Maybe he should have done something about it, instead of just hiding that letter in a drawer and pretending everything was fine. Sarah moved closer to him. What could he have done? By the time he found out, if he found out, it was probably too late. The sale was final. We were already living here. What was he supposed to do? Make his pregnant wife and young children homeless? I don't know, but keeping it secret, that was a choice. And now we have to live with the consequences of that choice. The doorbell rang, startling them both. They looked at each other, neither moving. It rang again, followed by a knock. Sarah walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. A woman stood on the porch, middle-aged Asian, wearing a business suit. She held a briefcase in one hand. Sarah opened the door. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes. My name is Grace Chun. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Dorothy Chun. I believe you received a letter from Henderson Associates." Sarah's mouth went dry. She nodded, unable to speak. "May I come in? I think we have a lot to discuss." Sarah stepped head back, allowing Gracechin to enter. The woman moved with quiet confidence, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor of the entryway. She looked around, her gaze sweeping across the living room, and Sarah tried to see it through her eyes. The worn furniture, the family photos on the walls, the accumulated debris of decades of living. Did Gracechin see a home, or did she see stolen property? Michael appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, still holding the manila envelope. Gracechin's eyes went immediately to it, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or satisfaction. "You found it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Found what?" Michael's voice was defensive, protective. "My grandmother's letter. I've been looking for that for years. I knew it existed, but I didn't know where it was." Gracechin set her briefcase down on the coffee table and gestured to the couch. "May I sit?" Sarah nodded, feeling like a guest in her own home. She and Michael sat in the two armchairs across from the couch, the coffee table between them like a barrier or a negotiating table. Gracechin opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Let me start by saying that I understand this must be very difficult for you," Gracechin began. Her voice was professional but not unkind. "You grew up in this house. It's your home, and I'm not here to vilify your parents or to suggest that you personally did anything wrong. But," Sarah prompted, because there was clearly a but coming. "But the fact remains that this house was sold under circumstances that were, at best, ethically questionable and, at worst, legally fraudulent. My grandmother, Dorothy Chun, was not in a sound state of mind when she signed those papers. Her daughter, my mother Linda, took advantage of that. She sold the house and kept the money for herself, not for my grandmother's care, as she claimed." "Your mother," Michael said slowly. "Linda Chin is your mother?" Gracechin's expression hardened. "Was my mother. She died 6 years ago. And before you ask, no, we were not close. I spent most of my adult life trying to distance myself from what she did. But when she died, I found documents, letters, bank records. I pieced together the whole story. And I made a decision that I needed to try to make this right, even if it's decades too late." Sarah felt a headache beginning to pulse behind her eyes. "What does making it right look like to you?" "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. The law is complicated in cases like this. The statute of limitations has long since passed for any criminal charges. The sale was technically legal, even if it was morally reprehensible. Your parents bought the house in good faith, or so it appears. They paid market value. They had no reason to know about my grandmother's situation. But they did know," Michael said quietly. He held up the envelope. "Our father kept this letter. He knew." Gracechin leaned forward, her eyes intense. "May I see it?" Michael hesitated, then handed over the envelope. Gracechin pulled out the letter with careful, almost reverent movements. As she read, tears began to slide down her cheeks, though her expression remained composed. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. "I never got to meet my grandmother," she said softly. "My mother cut off contact with her after she went into the care facility. She told me my grandmother had died, that there was no point in visiting. I was only 8 years old. I believed her. It wasn't until I was in college that I learned the truth, that my grandmother had lived for years in that facility, alone, abandoned. By then it was too late. She was already gone." The room fell silent. Sarah felt tears on her own cheeks now, mourning for a woman she'd never known, a woman whose suffering had somehow funded her happy childhood. The injustice of it felt overwhelming, too big to process. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. "I'm so sorry for what happened to your grandmother." Gracechin wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, becoming professional again. "Thank you. But apologies don't solve the practical problem we're facing. The reason I'm here, the reason Henderson and Associates sent you that letter, is because I've been working with them to explore legal options. And we've discovered something interesting." She pulled a document from her folder and laid it on the coffee table. "This is a copy of the original sale agreement from 1978. If you look at the fine print, There's a clause here that states if the sale is ever proven to have been conducted under duress or without proper consent, the property would revert to the original owner's estate. Michael picked up the document and read it, his brow furrowed. This is pretty standard language. It's meant to protect against fraud. But like you said, the statute of limitations has passed. This clause is meaningless now. Not quite, Gratian said. There's a provision in state law that extends the statute of limitations in cases involving elder abuse and exploitation. My grandmother's case qualifies, which means legally I have grounds to challenge the ownership of this property. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Challenge the ownership. She looked around the living room again, seeing it differently now, not as her home, but as something temporary, something that might be taken away. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thick and hard to breathe. You want to take the house, Michael said flatly. I want justice for my grandmother, Gratian corrected. What that looks like, I'm still deciding. I could file a lawsuit. I could force a sale and claim the proceeds. I could demand that you vacate the property. I have options. But you haven't done any of that yet, Sarah said. Why not? Gratian was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. Because I'm not my mother. I don't want to cause unnecessary pain. And because I've been watching this house for the past few months, since your mother died, I've seen you coming and going. Sarah, I've seen your brother's family visiting. I've seen the way you look at this place, the way you touch the porch railing like it's something precious. I know what home means. My grandmother knew too. That's why losing it destroyed her. So, what do you want from us? Michael asked. His voice was tight, controlled, but Sarah could hear the anger underneath. I want to find a solution that honors my grandmother's memory without destroying your lives. I want acknowledgement of what happened. I want the truth to be known. And yes, I want some form of restitution. But I'm open to negotiation. Sarah's mind raced. Restitution. That meant money. Probably a lot of it. Money they didn't have. Their mother had left them the house. But not much else. There had been some savings. Enough to cover the funeral and a few months of expenses. But nothing substantial. Sarah worked as a teacher. A job she loved, but that barely paid enough to cover her rent and student loans. Michael made more as an accountant, but he had a family to support, a mortgage of his own. How much? Sarah asked. How much restitution are we talking about? Gratian pulled out another document. I had the house appraised. Current market value is approximately $450,000. In 1978, your parents paid $62,000 for it. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $280,000 in today's dollars. The difference, $170,000, represents the equity that should have remained with my grandmother's estate. $170,000. Sarah felt dizzy. It might as well have been $170 million. There was no way they could pay that. They'd have to sell the house. And even then, after paying off the remaining mortgage their mother had taken out for repairs over the years, there might not be enough left. We don't have that kind of money, Michael said. You know we don't. So what's the point of this negotiation? You're going to take the house either way. Not necessarily, Gratian said. There are other options. You could buy me out over time with a payment plan. You could sell the house and split the proceeds. You could deed me a percentage of ownership, and we could become co-owners. Or, she paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. Or, you could help me with something else I want. What's that? Sarah asked. I want to write a book about my grandmother's story, about elder abuse, about the legal system's failures, about how families can betray each other. I want her story to mean something, to maybe help other people avoid the same fate. And I want your family's perspective. I want to understand what your parents knew, when they knew it, how they live with that knowledge. I want the full truth, not just my grandmother's side of it. Michael stood up abruptly. Absolutely not. You want us to help you write a book that makes our parents look like villains? That exposes our family's private business to the world? No. No way. Your parents kept my grandmother's letter, Gratian said calmly. That suggests they felt guilty, that they knew what had happened was wrong. Maybe they wanted the truth, to come out someday. Maybe that's why your father didn't destroy the letter. Or maybe he kept it because he didn't know what else to do with it, Sarah said. Maybe he was just a man trying to provide for his family, who found out too late that he made a terrible mistake. Then let's tell that story, Gratian pressed. Let's show the complexity of it. I'm not interested in making anyone a villain. I'm interested in the truth. And in exchange for your cooperation, for your honesty, I'd be willing to significantly reduce the financial restitution. Say, $50,000 instead of $170,000, payable over 10 years, interest-free. Sarah and Michael looked at each other. $50,000 was still a huge amount, but it was manageable. Maybe they could take out loans, make payments. They could keep the house. But at what cost? Their parents' reputation? Their family's privacy? The comfortable narrative they'd always believed about their childhood? I need time to think about this, Michael said. We both do. This is too big a decision to make right now. Gratian nodded and stood, gathering her papers back into her briefcase. Of course. Take a week. Talk it over. But I need an answer by next Saturday. If you're not willing to work with me, I'll have no choice but to pursue legal action. And I should warn you, if it goes to court, you'll likely lose the house entirely and still face legal fees on top of it. She walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, I hope we can find a way to work together. I don't want to be the person who takes away your home. But I also can't let what happened to my grandmother be forgotten, swept under the rug like it didn't matter. She mattered. Her pain mattered. And someone needs to acknowledge that. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Sarah and Michael sat in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on them. The house, which had felt so solid and permanent that morning, now felt fragile, like it might dissolve around them at any moment. We need to talk to Jennifer, Michael said finally. This affects her and the kids, too. They love this house. Emma and Jake, they have memories here with Grandma. What are you going to tell them? The truth, I guess. What else can I tell them? Michael rubbed his face with both hands. God. Sarah, how did everything get so complicated? A week ago, the biggest problem in my life was whether to refinance my mortgage. Now I'm finding out our entire childhood was built on a lie. It wasn't a lie, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Mom and Dad loved us. They gave us a good home. That part was real. Was it? How can we know what was real and what was just guilt and denial? Michael picked up the manila envelope again, looking at their father's handwriting on the front. He knew, Sarah. He knew, and he never told us. What else didn't he tell us? What else was he hiding? Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. Don't do that. Don't let this one thing erase everything else. Dad was a good father. He worked hard. He was there for us. He taught us right from wrong. Except when it came to this house, apparently. He was human. He made a mistake, or he was caught in an impossible situation. That doesn't make him a bad person, doesn't it? Michael's voice rose. He benefited from someone else's suffering and did nothing about it. He let an old woman die alone in a nursing home while his kids played in her backyard. How is that not bad? Because life is complicated. Because sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. Sarah was shouting now, all the stress and fear and confusion of the day pouring out. What was he supposed to do, Michael? Tell us when we were kids that our home was stolen? Make us feel guilty for being happy? Uproot his family and make them homeless to satisfy some abstract sense of justice? He could have tried to make it right. He could have reached out to Dorothy Chun, offered her something, acknowledged what happened. Instead, he had a letter in a drawer and pretended everything was fine. You don't know that. You don't know what he did or didn't do. You're making assumptions based on one letter. Then help me understand. Michael threw the envelope down on the coffee table. Help me figure out how to think about this, because right now I feel like I don't know who my father was. I don't know who my family is. And I don't know how to explain any of this to my kids. Sarah's anger drained away, leaving only exhaustion. She sank back into the armchair and closed her eyes. I don't know either. I don't have any answers. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, The afternoon sun moved across the sky, changing the quality of light in the room. Shadows lengthened. The house creaked and settled. The sounds Sarah had heard her entire life. Sounds that had always meant safety and comfort. Now they sounded different, ominous, like the house itself was groaning under the weight of its secrets. "I should go," Michael said eventually. "Jennifer will be wondering where I am, and I need to figure out how to tell her about all this." "Okay. Will you be all right here alone?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked at him, her brother, who she'd fought with and played with and grown up alongside. They'd been close once, before life and distance and different priorities had pulled them apart. Now they were bound together again by this terrible knowledge, this shared burden. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'll manage. I always do." Michael stood and walked to the door, then paused. "Sarah, whatever we decide, we're in this together, right? We're family. That has to mean something." "It means everything," Sarah said. "It's all we have left." After Michael left, Sarah walked through the house again, but this time she was looking for something specific. She went to her parents' bedroom, the room where her father had died, where her mother had slept alone for 12 years afterward. The bed was still made with her mother's favorite quilt, the one with the star pattern. The dresser still held her mother's jewelry box, her hairbrush, her reading glasses. Sarah opened the closet and breathed in the smell of her mother's clothes. Lavender and mothballs and something else, something uniquely her mother. She ran her hands over the dresses and blouses, feeling the different textures, cotton and silk and wool. Her mother had been a practical woman, not given to extravagance, but she'd had a few nice things for church and special occasions. In the back of the closet, behind the hanging clothes, Sarah found a box. It was cardboard, the kind that reams of printer paper come in, and it was heavy. She pulled it out and sat on the floor with it, her heart beating fast. The box wasn't labeled, but something about it felt significant, hidden away like this. Inside were more letters, dozens of them, bundled together with rubber bands. Sarah picked up the first bundle and slipped off the rubber band, which crumbled with age. The letters were addressed to her father, all from the same sender, Dorothy Chun. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the first letter. It was dated August 1978, 2 months after the sale of the house. The handwriting was shaky, difficult to read, but Sarah forced herself to go slowly, to understand every word. "Dear Mr. Mitchell, I am writing to you about the house you recently purchased on Maple Street. I am the woman who used to live there, who thought it was still my home. I know you have done nothing wrong. You bought the house fairly, through proper channels. But I need you to understand that I did not want to sell it. My daughter sold it without my true consent. I was confused, sick. I didn't understand what I was signing. Please, if there is any way to undo this, I am begging you. That house is all I have left of my life, of my husband, of my memories. Please help me." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She picked up another letter, dated a month later. "Dear Mr. Mitchell, I wrote to you before but received no response. Perhaps my letter did not reach you. I am writing again to plead with you to reconsider. I know you have a family, a baby on the way. I do not want to cause you hardship, but I am desperate. The care facility where I live is not home. I want to go home. Please, is there any way we could arrange for me to buy back the house? I have some savings. It is not much, but I would give you everything I have." Another letter, dated October. "Mr. Mitchell, I am writing to you for the 3rd time. I understand you may not want to respond. Perhaps you think I am crazy, a confused old woman who doesn't know what she wants. But I am not crazy. I am sick, yes, but I know my own mind well enough to know that I want my home back. I am asking you, as one human being to another, please consider my situation. Please have mercy." Sarah went through letter after letter, watching Dorothy Chen's handwriting deteriorate as her dementia progressed, watching her pleas become more desperate, and then, finally, resigned. The last letter was dated December 1978, 6 months after the sale. "Mr. Mitchell, this will be my final letter to you. I understand now that you are not going to help me. Perhaps even not. Or perhaps you simply choose not to. I do not know which, and I suppose it does not matter. The result is the same. I will die in this place, away from everything I love. I hope you and your family are happy in my house. I hope your children grow up healthy and safe there. I hope you never know what it feels like to lose everything. I hope you never have to beg strangers for mercy and be ignored. I am not writing this with anger, only with sadness. I am too tired for anger now. I just wanted you to know that I existed, that I was real, that my pain was real. I wanted someone to acknowledge that. Goodbye, Mr. Mitchell. I hope you live a good life. Sarah sat on the floor of her mother's closet, surrounded by letters from a dead woman, and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body, that left her gasping for air. She cried for Dorothy Chun, who had died alone and forgotten. She cried for her father, who had received these letters and kept them, who had carried this guilt for decades. She cried for her mother, who must have known, who must have helped her husband bear this burden. And she cried for herself and Michael, for the loss of innocence, for the shattering of the simple story they'd always believed about their family. When the tears finally stopped, Sarah felt hollowed out, empty. She gathered up the letters and put them back in the box, then carried the box downstairs. She set it on the kitchen table next to the lawyer's letter and Grace Chen's business card. Evidence. Proof. The truth laid out in black and white. Her phone rang. It was Michael. "I told Jennifer," he said without preamble. His voice sounded rough, like he'd been crying too. "She thinks we should cooperate with Grace Chun. She says $50,000 is better than losing the house entirely, and if telling our story helps prevent other families from going to the same thing, maybe some good can come from all this." "I found more letters," Sarah said. "From Dorothy Chun to Dad. She wrote to him, Michael. She begged him to help her, and he didn't." Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, "How many letters?" "Dozens, over several months. She pleaded with him. She offered to buy the house back. She just wanted to go home. And he kept them. He kept them all." "Yes. Why would he do that? Why torture himself?" Sarah looked around the kitchen, at the familiar objects that now felt tainted. Maybe he thought he deserved to be tortured. Maybe it was his way of not forgetting, of not letting himself off the hook. Or maybe he was just a coward who couldn't face what he'd done. Maybe both things are true. Michael sighed a long, exhausted sound. "Grace Chin needs to see those letters. They're part of the story." "I know. So we're doing this? We're cooperating with her." Sarah thought about Dorothy Chen's final letter, about her hope that someone would acknowledge her pain. "Yes, we're doing this. Not for us, but for her. She deserves to have her story told." "Okay, I'll call Grace Chin tomorrow and tell her we agree to her terms." "Michael?" "Yeah. I am sorry. For everything. For fighting with you earlier. For all of this. It's not your fault, Sarah. It's not either of our faults. We're just the ones left to clean up the mess." After they hung up, Sarah made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, warming her hands on the mug. The evening light was fading, the kitchen growing dim. She should turn on a light. But she didn't move. There was something fitting about sitting in the growing darkness, about letting the shadows claim the room. She thought about her father. Imagine him sitting in the same spot, reading Dorothy Chen's letters. What had he felt? Guilt, certainly. Regret, but also probably defensiveness. He'd had a pregnant wife, a mortgage, a future to build. What was he supposed to do? Give up the house and start over? Admit to his wife that they'd made a terrible mistake? Uproot their lives for a stranger? And yet, Dorothy Chen wasn't really a stranger. She was a person, a human being with feelings and rights, and a lifetime of memories tied to this place. She mattered. Her suffering mattered. And Sarah's father had chosen to ignore that, to prioritize his own family's comfort over her pain. Was that wrong? Sarah didn't know anymore. A week ago, she would have said family comes first. Always. Now she wasn't sure. Maybe there were some things more important than family loyalty. Maybe truth and justice and basic human decency had to count for something too. The phone rang again. This time it was a number Sarah didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello, is this Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice, elderly, uncertain. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Margaret Foster. I'm calling because I saw your mother's obituary a few months ago, and I've been meaning to reach out. I knew Dorothy Chun. We were friends back before she went into the care facility. I visited her there sometimes, when her daughter stopped coming. She talked about you." Sarah's heart began to pound. She talked about me, but she didn't know me. I was just a baby when she lost the house. She knew of you. She used to drive by the house sometimes, before she got too sick. She'd see your mother pushing a stroller, or later, she'd see you and your brother playing in the yard. She told me once that watching you grow up was both the hardest and the most comforting thing. Hard because it reminded her of what she'd lost, but comforting because she could see that the house was being loved, that it was still a home. Sarah couldn't speak. Tears were flowing again, silent this time. Margaret Foster continued, her voice gentle. "Dorothy wasn't a bitter woman. Not really. She was hurt and angry at her daughter, yes. But she didn't blame your parents, not entirely. She understood that they were just trying to build a life, same as she had done. She just wished someone had listened to her, had acknowledged what happened. That's all she really wanted, to be heard." "I hear her now," Sarah whispered. "I hear her, and I'm so sorry." "I know you are, dear. I can hear it in your voice. And I think Dorothy would appreciate that. She'd want you to know that it's okay to love the house, to have good memories there. She wouldn't want you to feel guilty for being happy. She just wanted her story to be known, to matter." "It will be," Sarah said. "We're going to make sure of it." After the call ended, Sarah sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, thinking about Dorothy Chin watching her and Michael play in the yard, finding some small comfort in seeing the house lived in and loved. It was such a sad image, and yet there was something beautiful in it too, a kind of grace, a generosity of spirit that Sarah wasn't sure she could have managed in the same situation. She thought about Grace Chun, Dorothy's granddaughter, who had spent years trying to piece together her grandmother's story, try and make things right even though it was too late to give Dorothy what she really wanted. That took courage, Sarah realized. It would have been easier to let it go, to accept that the past was past and nothing could change it. But Grace Chun had chosen the harder path, the path of truth and accountability. And now Sarah and Michael had to choose their own path. They could fight, could hire lawyers, and try to keep the house at any cost. Or they could do what Dorothy Chun had asked for all those years ago, acknowledge what happened, tell the truth, try and make some kind of amends, even if it was imperfect and incomplete. Sarah knew which choice her father would have wanted them to make, if he'd had the courage to make it himself. That's why he'd kept the letters, why he'd hidden them but not destroyed them. He'd wanted someone to find them someday, to know the truth, to do what he couldn't. She pulled out her phone and texted Michael. "We're doing the right thing. Dad would be proud." A moment later, he texted back, "I hope so. I really hope so." The next morning, Sarah woke early, before the sun had fully risen. She'd spent the night in her old bedroom, unable to face the thought of driving back to her apartment. The room felt smaller than she remembered, the ceiling lower, the walls closer together. Or maybe she was just bigger now, expanded by years and experiences that her teenage self couldn't have imagined. She lay in bed, listening to the house wake up around her, the furnace clicking on, sending warm air through the vents with a soft whoosh, the pipes groaning as water moved through them, a bird singing outside her window, greeting the dawn. These sounds had been the soundtrack of her childhood, as familiar as her own heartbeat. Would she lose them? Would this be one of her last mornings in this house? Sarah got up and dressed, pulling on jeans and an old sweatshirt she found in her closet. It smelled faintly of her teenage years, of cheap perfume and adolescent dreams. She went downstairs and made coffee, the ritual soothing in its ordinariness. Scooped the grounds, poured the water, pressed a button, wait. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the kitchen with a rich, bitter aroma. While the coffee brewed, Sarah opened her laptop and searched for Grace Chen. She found her easily, a lawyer specializing in elder law and estate cases. Her website showed a professional photo, Grace in a suit, smiling confidently. But there was something else in her eyes, something Sarah recognized now. Sadness, loss, the weight of carrying someone else's unfinished business. Sarah clicked through to a blog Grace maintained, articles about elder abuse, about protecting vulnerable adults, about the legal system's failures. And there, buried in the archives, was a post titled My Grandmother's House. Sarah's hands trembled as she clicked on it. The post was dated 3 years ago. Grace wrote about growing up believing her grandmother was dead, about discovering the truth in college, about the guilt and anger that discovery had triggered. She wrote about tracking down records, about finding the care facility where Dorothy had lived, about talking to staff members who barely remembered her. She wrote about standing outside 1523 Maple Street, looking at the house her grandmother had loved and lost, wondering if the people inside had any idea the history they were living in. I don't know what I'm going to do with this information, Grace had written. Part of me wants to sue, to take back what was stolen, to punish the people who benefited from my grandmother's suffering. But another part of me knows it won't bring her back, won't undo the pain she endured. Maybe the best I can do is tell her story, make sure she's not forgotten. Maybe that's enough. I don't know yet. Sarah closed the laptop and sipped her coffee. It was too hot, burning her tongue, but she welcomed the sharp sensation. It felt real, grounding, in a world that had become unmoored from everything she thought she knew. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Can you meet me at the house at 10? Bringing Jennifer and the kids. Want them to understand what's happening. Sarah texted back. I'm already here. Spent the night. Okay, see you soon. Sarah spent the next hour cleaning, a nervous energy driving her to wipe down counters and sweep floors. She needed to do something with her hands, needed to feel useful. The house responded to her efforts, becoming brighter, more orderly. But no amount of cleaning could erase the weight of what they'd learned, the knowledge that sat heavy in every room. Michael arrived exactly at 10, always punctual, always reliable. Jennifer was with him, and their 2 kids, Emma and Jake. Emma was 9, Jake was 6. They burst through the door with the chaotic energy of children, immediately running to explore the house they'd visited countless times before. Aunt Sarah. Emma hugged her around the waist. Dad says we're having a family meeting. Are we in trouble? Sarah smoothed Emma's hair. So like Michael's, fine and light brown. No, es with you. Nobody's in trouble. We just need to talk about some grown-up stuff. Boring, Jake pronounced. But he hugged Sarah too before running off to the living room where he knew a box of old toys waited. Jennifer embraced Sarah, holding on a moment longer than usual. Michael told me everything, she said quietly. I'm so sorry. This must be incredibly hard. It is, Sarah admitted, but I think we're doing the right thing. I think so too. They gathered in the living room, the adults on the furniture, the kids on the floor with toys scattered around them. Michael cleared his throat, and Sarah could see how nervous he was, how much he dreaded this conversation. Emma, Jake, we need to talk to you about something important, Michael began. It's about this house, about Grandma and Grandpa, and about a woman named Dorothy Chan. For the next 20 minutes, Michael and Sarah took turns explaining the story, simplifying it for children but not hiding the essential truth. A woman had owned this house. She got sick. Her daughter sold the house without really asking her. Grandma and Grandpa bought it, not knowing the full story. The woman was very sad about losing her home. Now her granddaughter wanted to make things right. Emma listened with wide eyes, her toy forgotten in her lap. Jake seemed less interested, playing with a truck, but Sarah could tell he was listening too, processing in his own way. So we might have to leave this house? Emma asked, her voice small. We don't know yet, Michael said. We're working on a solution. But yes, it's possible. But this is Grandma's house. It's where we come for Christmas. It's where she taught me to bake cookies. Emma's eyes filled with tears. It's not fair. You're right, Sarah said gently. It's not fair. It wasn't fair to Dorothy Chin either when she lost the house. Sometimes life isn't fair, and we have to figure out how to make the best of a bad situation. Did Grandma and Grandpa know they were doing something wrong? Emma asked. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. This was the heart of it, the question they'd been wrestling with themselves. We think Grandpa found out later, Sarah said carefully, after they'd already bought the house, after I was born, and he didn't know what to do about it. He made a choice to keep the house, to give his family a home. Maybe it was a wrong choice, or maybe it was just a complicated choice. People aren't always all good or all bad. Sometimes they're just trying their best and making mistakes along the way. Emma thought about this, her face serious. I think Grandpa should have tried to help the lady, even if it was hard. I think you're right, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. I think he should have too. Jake looked up from his truck. Is the lady's granddaughter mean? Is she trying to hurt us? No, Sarah said firmly. She's not mean. She's just trying to honor her grandmother, to make sure people remember her and know what happened. That's actually a pretty brave thing to do. Jennifer spoke up for first time. We're going to help her write a book about her grandmother. We're going to tell the whole story, including our family's part in it. And we're going to pay her some money to try to make up for what her grandmother lost. How much money? Emma asked, practical like her father. A lot, Michael said. Enough that we'll have to be very careful with our spending for a long time. But it's the right thing to do. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling over them. Then Jake said, Can I still play with the toys here? The adults laughed, the tension breaking slightly. Yes, Sarah said. For now, you can still play with the toys. The children went back to playing. Their resilience a reminder that life goes on, that even big problems don't stop the world from turning. The adults moved to the kitchen, leaving the kids in the living room where they could keep an eye on them. That went better than I expected, Michael said, pouring himself coffee from the pot Sarah had made. They're good kids, Jennifer said. They understand more than we give them credit for. Sarah's phone rang. Grace Chun. She answered, putting it on speaker so Michael and Jennifer could hear. Sarah, thank you for agreeing to meet. I want to let you know that I've drafted a preliminary agreement based on our discussion. I can email it to you and your brother to review. But I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet with me again, somewhere neutral. Maybe a coffee shop? I like to talk more informally, not as a lawyer, but as someone who's also trying to make sense of all this. Sarah looked at Michael, who nodded. Sure, Sarah said. When were you thinking? Would this afternoon work? Say, 2 o'clock at the Riverside Cafe downtown. We'll be there. After the call ended, Jennifer offered to stay at the house with the kids while Sarah and Michael met with Grace. Take your time, she said. Figure this out. We'll be fine here. At 1:45, Sarah and Michael drove downtown together in Michael's car. They didn't talk much, both lost in their own thoughts. The Riverside Cafe was a local place, nothing fancy, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. It smelled of coffee and fresh bread, comforting and ordinary. Grace Chun was already there, sitting at a corner table with 3 cups of coffee waiting. She dressed casually today, jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger, more vulnerable, without the armor of her business suit. Thank you for coming, she said as they sat down. I got you both coffee. I hope that's okay. I didn't know what you liked, so I got it black. There's cream and sugar on the table. They fixed their coffees in silence, the small ritual giving them something to do with their hands. Then Grace pulled out a folder, but she didn't open it immediately. I want to start by saying something I should have said yesterday. Grace began. I am sorry. I came into your home making demands, threatening legal action, treating this like a business transaction. But it's not. It's personal for all of us. My grandmother's pain is personal. Your family's history is personal. And I should have approached it with more sensitivity. Thank you, Sarah said. That means a lot. I've been thinking about what you said about your father keeping my grandmother's letters. I'd like to see them, if you're willing to share them. Sarah had brought the box with her, anticipating this request. She set it on the table between them. Grace opened it slowly, reverently, and pulled out the first bundle of letters. As she read, tears began to fall, dripping onto the pages. She didn't wipe them away, just let them fall. Her handwriting, Grace whispered. I've never seen her handwriting before. My mother destroyed everything, all her papers, all her photos. She wanted to erase her. But here it is, proof that she existed, that she fought, that she mattered. Michael reached across the table and put his hand over Grace's. It was a simple gesture, but it said everything. We see you. We acknowledge your pain. We're sorry. Grace read through several letters, then carefully put them back in the box. These need to be preserved. They're historical documents, evidence of elder abuse and the legal system's failures. Would you be willing to donate them to an archive, or to let me include copies in the book? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. Whatever helps tell the story. Grace opened her folder and pulled out several documents. I've drafted an agreement. The terms are what we discussed. $50,000, payable over 10 years, interest-free. In exchange, you'll cooperate with my research for the book, providing interviews, access to any other documents you find, and permission to use your family story. The book will be published under both our names, with proceeds split 3 ways. 1/3 to me, 1/3 to you and Michael jointly, and 1/3 to a charity supporting elder abuse prevention. Sarah and Michael read through the agreement carefully. It was fair, more than fair. Grace could have demanded so much more, could have taken everything. Instead, she was offering them a way to keep their home and their dignity while still honoring her grandmother's memory. There's one more thing, Grace said. I'd like to install a plaque on the house. Nothing big or intrusive, just a small marker that says Dorothy Chin lived there from 1946 to 1978, and that she loved it. Would that be acceptable? Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes again. More than acceptable. It's perfect. Michael pulled out a pen. Where do we sign? They spent the next hour going over details, asking questions, clarifying terms. But the hard part was over. They'd made their decision, chosen their path. Now it was just a matter of following through. As they were preparing to leave, Grace said, "There's someone I'd like you to meet. Margaret Foster, my grandmother's friend. She's the one who told me about the letters, who encouraged me to pursue this. She's 92 now, but she's still sharp. I think it would mean a lot to her to meet you, to know that my grandmother's story is being told." "We like that," Sarah said. "Very much." They exchanged phone numbers and email addresses, making plans to meet again soon to begin the interview process for the book. As Sarah and Michael walked back to the car, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not that everything would be easy or that the pain would go away, but that they were moving in the right direction, toward truth and healing and some kind of justice, however imperfect. "You okay?" Michael asked as they drove back to the house. "Yeah," Sarah said. "I think I am." "You?" "Getting there." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about what Emma said, about how Grandpa should have tried to help Dorothy Chun. She's right. And I think by doing this, by telling the truth and making amends, we're finishing what he started, or what he should have started." "I like that," Sarah said. "We're not betraying him. We're honoring him by doing what he couldn't." When they got back to the house, Jennifer and the kids were in the backyard. Jennifer had found an old badminton set in the garage, and they were attempting to play, laughing as the shuttlecock flew wildly off course. The sound of their laughter drifted through the open windows, filling the house with life and joy. Sarah stood in the kitchen, watching them through the window. This house had seen so much. Dorothy Chen's happiness and heartbreak, her parents' hopes and guilt, her own childhood and Michael's. And now Emma and Jake, making their own memories, unaware of the complicated history beneath their feet. But they would know. Sarah and Michael would tell them the full story as they grew older, would make sure they understood that their family's comfort had come at a cost, that they had a responsibility to acknowledge that and do better. That was a lesson in all of this, Sarah thought. Not that her parents were villains, or that she and Michael should feel guilty for being happy, but that actions have consequences, that silence can be its own kind of harm, and that it's never too late to try to make things right. Over the next several months, Sarah and Michael worked with Grace Chin on the book. They spent hours being interviewed, digging through old photos and documents, trying to piece together a complete picture of what had happened. It was painful work, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about their family. But it was also healing in a way. By speaking the truth out loud, by refusing to hide or minimize what happened, they were breaking a cycle of silence and denial. Grace introduced them to Margaret Foster, who turned out to be a delightful woman with a sharp wit and a phenomenal memory. She told them stories about Dorothy Chun, bringing her to life in a way the letters couldn't. Dorothy had loved gardening, Margaret said. She'd grown tomatoes and zucchini and flowers, filling her yard with color and life. She'd been a talented seamstress, making clothes for her daughter and quilts for her grandchildren. Though she'd never gotten to meet them, she'd volunteered at the library, reading to children every Saturday morning. She was a whole person, Margaret said, looking at Sarah and Michael with eyes that had seen too much loss. Not just a victim, not just a sad story. She had a full life, rich with love and work and friendship. That's what I want people to remember. Yes, what happened to her was terrible, but she was more than her suffering. Those words became the guiding principle for the book. Grace, Sarah, and Michael worked to tell a complete story, one that honored Dorothy's full humanity, while also acknowledging the harm that had been done. They included their father's perspective, too, as much as they could reconstruct it from the letters he'd kept and the few conversations they remembered having with him about the house. They discovered that their father had tried, in his own limited way, to make amends. He'd made anonymous donations to the care facility where Dorothy had lived, earmarked for activities and improvements. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. It showed that he'd cared, that he'd been troubled by what he'd learned. He was a coward, Michael said when they discovered this. But he was a coward who felt guilty. That's something, I guess. It's more than something, Grace said gently. It's proof that he had a conscience, that he knew right from wrong, even if he couldn't always act on it. That's important. It makes him human. The book took a year to write. During that time, Sarah and Michael made their first payment to Grace, scraping together $5,000 between them. It hurt, financially, but it also felt good, like they were actively working to correct an injustice, not just talking about it. The plaque was installed on a cool October morning, almost exactly a year after Sarah had received the first letter from the lawyers. Grace was there, and Margaret, and Sarah and Michael with their families. Jennifer had brought flowers, which she planted in the front garden. Emma and Jake helped, digging in the dirt with small shovels, their faces serious with concentration. The plaque was simple, bronze, mounted next to the front door. It read, Dorothy Chin lived in this house from 1946 to 1978. She loved it deeply and lost it unjustly. May her memory be a blessing and a reminder that every home has a history, and every history deserves to be honored. Margaret stood in front of the plaque for a long time, her hand resting on it, her eyes closed. When she finally turned around, she was smiling through her tears. Dorothy would have liked this, she said. She would have liked knowing that she wasn't forgotten, that her story mattered. Thank you for giving her this. They went inside for coffee and cake, filling the house with conversation and laughter. Grace walked through the rooms, seeing them for the first time, and Sarah watched her face, trying to imagine what she was feeling. Was she angry that Sarah's family had lived here all these years? Was she sad for what her grandmother had lost? But when Grace turned to Sarah, her expression was peaceful. It's a good house, she said. I can see why my grandmother loved it. And I can see that your family loved it too. That matters. Love matters, even when it's complicated. The book was published the following spring. It was called The House on Maple Street, a story of lost silence and belated justice. The cover showed a photo of the house, with Dorothy Chen's plaque visible next to the door. Inside were photos of Dorothy, of Sarah and Michael's parents, of the letters and documents that told the story. The book didn't become a bestseller, but it found its audience. Elder law advocates used it in training. Families dealing with similar situations reached out, grateful to know they weren't alone. A local theater company even adapted it into a play, which Sarah and Michael attended on opening night, sitting in the dark and watching actors portray their family's complicated history. After the play, a young woman approached them. She was crying, clutching a program to her chest. Thank you, she said. Thank you for telling this story. My grandmother is in a nursing home right now, and my aunt wants to sell her house without really consulting her. I've been feeling like I'm crazy, like I'm the only one who thinks this is wrong. But your book, your story, it gave me the courage to fight for her. I'm hiring a lawyer. I'm going to make sure my grandmother's wishes are respected." Sarah hugged the woman, feeling the weight of responsibility and purpose. This was why they'd done it. Not just for Dorothy Chun, though that would have been enough, but for all the other Dorothys, all the vulnerable people who needed someone to stand up for them, to say that their lives and their wishes mattered. 2 years after that first letter from the lawyers, Sarah made a decision. She gave up her apartment and moved back into the house on Maple Street. Michael and Jennifer had been encouraging her to do it for months, pointing out that it made financial sense, that the house was too big to sit empty most of the time, that it needed someone to care for it. But Sarah's reasons went deeper than practicality. She wanted to live with a history, to honor both Dorothy Chen's memory and her own family's complicated legacy. She wanted to tend the garden, to maintain the plaque, to be a steward of this place that had meant so much to so many people. She set up her bedroom in her old room, but she also created a small memorial space in what had been her father's office. She framed some of Dorothy Chen's letters and hung them on the wall, along with photos Margaret had given her. She put out a guest book, inviting visitors to write their thoughts and memories. The house became a kind of living museum, a place where past and present coexisted, where mistakes were acknowledged and amends were attempted. Margaret visited often, sitting in the living room and telling stories about Dorothy, keeping her friend's memory alive. Grace came too, sometimes with her own children, teaching them about their great-grandmother, making sure the family history wasn't lost. And Michael brought his family every Sunday for dinner, a new tradition they'd started. They'd gather around the old dining room table, the one that had seen so many family meals, and they'd eat and talk and laugh. Sometimes they'd talk about Dorothy Chun, making sure Emma and Jake knew her story. Other times they'd just be a family, making new memories in a house that had seen so much. One Sunday evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Emma asked Sarah a question. "Aunt Sarah, do you think Grandpa would be proud of us for what we did with the book and everything?" Sarah thought about her father, about the man who'd kept Dorothy Chen's letters but couldn't bring himself to respond to them, who'd made anonymous donations but couldn't face the woman he'd wronged, who'd loved his family fiercely but couldn't quite do the right thing when it mattered most. "I think he would be," Sarah said finally. "I think he'd be relieved that we finished what he couldn't. And I think he'd be proud that we chose truth over comfort, even when it was hard. Do you think Dorothy would forgive us?" Emma asked. Sarah looked at the plaque visible through the front window, at the flowers Jennifer had planted that were blooming in the spring sunshine, at the house that had held so much love and pain and complicated history. "I think she already has," Sarah said. "I think by telling her story, by making sure she's remembered, we've given her what she really wanted. Not revenge, not even a house back, just acknowledgement, just the truth. And that's a kind of forgiveness, I think, for all of us." That night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah sat on the front porch in the gathering dusk. The street was quiet, the neighborhood settling in for the evening. Lights came on in windows up and down the block, each one representing a family, a history, a collection of stories both beautiful and painful. Sarah thought about all the houses on this street, on every street in every town. How many of them had complicated histories? How many held secrets, mistakes, moments of injustice or cruelty or simple human weakness? Probably all of them, because houses were just containers for human lives, and human lives were messy and complicated and full of contradictions. The difference was that this house, her house, Dorothy Chen's house, now had its truth told. The silence had been broken. The secret had been brought into the light. And while that hadn't erased the pain or undone the injustice, it had transformed it into something else. A lesson, a warning, a reminder that every choice has consequences, that silence can be its own kind of harm, and that it's never too late to try to make things right. Sarah stood and walked the plaque, running her fingers over the engraved letters. Dorothy Chun, 1946 to 1978. Loved deeply, lost unjustly. May her memory be a blessing. "I'll take care of it," Sarah whispered to the woman who'd lived here before her, the woman whose loss had made her family's happiness possible. I'll take care of your house, and I'll make sure your story is never forgotten. I promise." The evening breeze picked up, rustling the leaves of the old maple tree in the front yard, the one that had been there since Dorothy Chen's time. Since before that even, the tree had seen everything, had witnessed all the joy and sorrow this house had held, and it would be here long after Sarah was gone, a silent witness to whatever came next. Sarah went inside, locking the door behind her. The house settled around her with familiar creaks and sighs, welcoming her home. Not just her home, she reminded herself. Dorothy's home, her parents' home, a home with a complicated history and an uncertain future, but a home nonetheless. She walked through the rooms, turning off lights, checking windows, performing the small rituals of securing a house for the night. In each room, she felt the presence of everyone who'd lived here before her. Dorothy Chen arranging flowers on the dining room table, her father reading the newspaper in his armchair, her mother cooking in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. Michael and herself as children, running through these rooms, laughing and fighting and growing up. All of them were here, woven into the fabric of the house, their stories overlapping and intersecting in ways both beautiful and painful. And now Sarah was adding her own story to the mix, her own chapter in the ongoing history of 1523 Maple Street. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, her hand trailing along the banister that had been polished smooth by decades of hands before hers. At the top of the stairs, she paused and looked back down at the entryway, at the front door with Dorothy Chen's plaque just outside it. "Sweet home," she whispered to the empty house. Or not, but home nonetheless, with all its complications, all its history, all its truth. Home. And in the quiet of the old house, with the weight of the past and the promise of the future pressing down on her in equal measure, Sarah finally felt at peace. Not because everything was resolved, not because the pain had disappeared, but because the truth had been told, the silence had been broken, and in that breaking, in that telling, something had been healed. Not everything, not completely, but enough to move forward, enough to honor both Dorothy Chen's memory and her own family's complicated legacy, enough to believe that even when we make mistakes, even when we benefit from injustice, even when we're complicit in harm, we can still choose to do better. We can still choose truth over comfort, acknowledgement over denial, healing over silence. And that choice, Sarah thought as she finally climbed into bed, that choice makes all the difference. The house creaked and settled around her, holding her in its embrace. This house that had seen so much, that had held so many stories, that had been both a source of joy and a site of injustice. It was all those things at once, complicated and contradictory and deeply, profoundly human, just like the people who'd lived in it, just like all of us, trying our best, making mistakes, for forgiveness, reaching for something better. Sweet home or not, but home nonetheless.